So in this panel, which is the last panel for today, we're going to talk about the many different parameters that departments use when making hiring decisions. Some of them are more obvious than others, and we're going to discuss how these different factors kind of are weighed during the different steps during the hiring process. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to do this in alphabetical order by first name. So Andrea, you get to go first.
Okay.
Like 3 sentences, like not your full CV.
So I'm Andrea Hodge, and I am the chair of the Department of Chemical Engineering Material Science here at USC.
Awesome. Jacinta?
Hi, I'm Jacinta Conrad. I am a professor of chemical engineering at the University of Houston. And just as a note, I also have an academic background that doesn't match my current job description.
I'm Michael Findlater. I'm an associate professor in chemistry here at Texas Tech University.
Perfect. You actually followed rules. Amazing. Okay. Okay. So first, so our last panel was focused on talking about some of the hiring myths. So in your opinion, what is the biggest hiring myth when looking at packets? So different career paths. So we're going to start with Jacinta, seeing as one of the biggest hiring myths is that, if you have a physics PhD, you have to be in a physics department. And that's clearly not true. So,
yeah, I would actually that would have been the one I highlighted, right? You can teach anything as a PhD, and this is one of the ones that I was very proactive about when I was hiring. But looking from the other side, I think the biggest hiring myth is that the hiring process is an individual judgment on your potential to be a successful faculty member. I hope that this panel brings out some of the myriad ways in which your whether or not you receive an offer has a lot of reflection on what the faculty thought about you. There's a lot of factors. So I would highlight those two.
Andrea?
Well, I think that a lot of people come with the misconception that, as long as you do a great presentation and a great visit, that's all it goes. But I think there's a lot of things behind the scenes that you don't control. And I think it's good to know those factors, such as where is the department at, who had just left, who had just come in, whether or not they have the physical space for you, or whether you're in a simulation experimentalist, and that you don't control. And so it can vary a lot from university to university, what each department is at that point that you come for the interview, and a lot of that, independent of your skill, will also factor in whether you get an offer or not.
Michael?
Okay, so building off of what Andrea and Jacinta just said, I think the most succinct way I can say this is the biggest myth is that we know what we're doing. Hiring faculty, there is no crystal ball. There can be people who are MIT, Caltech, Stanford, everything looks perfect for them on their CV, and then they don't end up getting tenure, or they don't get that big grant that they really want. So we can't really predict success as well as we'd like to. So just understand that if you think you're a fit for a department, go ahead and apply. You never know what that one factor will be that gets you the job.
Great. So on that note, what makes an application stand out in that electronic pile of PDFs? So Michael, you get to handle this first.
One of the things that really does jump out at you is the research proposals. We get a lot of applications, and Texas Tech is a smaller, we're a very large school, but research-wise, we're kind of a small school. And we have to be very selective with who we interview. And the thing that really makes or breaks an application for us is the research proposal. Is it exciting? Is it dynamic? Does it have fit overall with our department's goals? And that's, again, one of the aspects that you can't control behind the scenes.
Jacinta?
So I would also think that I'm going to give two answers. One is the research statement is very important. One, I've sat on hiring committees in 4 departments in my college in engineering, and then also seen candidates in chemistry across campus. So the University of Houston very quickly is a research intensive university, but not an elite university. So we are research aspirational in that standpoint. And so we use the research statement as a gauge or proxy to see whether or not you're going to be ready to apply and compete successfully for research proposals on day one. So statements that have pictures, that have clear statements of aims, that have testable hypotheses. These are what we typically find as being very, very exciting when we broadly across the university we read. The other thing I would note is, and this is a big challenge, we're a big urban public institution. Our faculty do not represent our students. And so we are continually looking to hire faculty that better reflect the racial diversity of our candidates, the first generation of our students, the first generation status of our students. So that's something else that is, and that's a university-wide priority, along with support structures to support faculty members from groups that may have been historically minoritized.
Andrea?
All right. So at USC, obviously, it's an elite research institution, and I don't know how it is in other places, but we get hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants for every position. So actually, in the 7 or 10 panels that I've been in to look for faculty, you really look at that CV really quickly because you had to go through hundreds of them and you had to comment on all of them. And so what content, productivity already, because you're going to be in a very elite research intensive institution. So, do you have publications? Do you have presentations? Is it pretty bare? Yeah. So those kind of things, I think, are a quick look. Obviously, yes, we do look at the research statement, but if the rest of the CV looks kind of empty, then it probably wouldn't even make it to that because we're looking at 400, 500 for one position. And is it relevant? So we also get a lot of things that are, we say quantum materials and somebody is doing, polymer chemistry. So it's a little off as well. But again, if the CV looks really good, we may continue to look at it. So content and already shown productivity I think is very important. That's going to be, the legacy that you already come with. I think is important when you're making those first steps. Even for an assistant professor, you have people that have 40 papers and you have people that have 2. And so, you're competing with very high achieving individuals. And so we will look at that very closely. Okay,
so we have a ton of questions. So I was going to ask you a third, but we're just not going to make it there. Maybe we'll circle back. Okay, so starting at the top, because people can rank them. Faculty positions were initially being offered to fresh PhD graduates. How often does this happen nowadays? Do the faculty search committees value the postdoc experience, or is it just becoming a must, like a checkbox you have to fill? So we'll go in reverse order this time. Andrea.
Well, I think, again, this is handled by individuals and depends who's in charge of that committee and how they feel about it. I particularly feel very strongly that someone should have some exposure after their PhD, whether it's a postdoc or a company research position, but something to really branch out and being very distinctive from your advisor's research. So to me, it would be difficult for someone to argue that right straight out of their PhD, their PhD is completely different from their advisor. We don't want to hire their advisor. We want a different person. So, but again, it will vary, and the opinions of those people in charge, whoever be in charge of that position, can also vary. And they may be okay with that because of personal experience or because they think it's okay. I personally think there needs to be something else, whether it's a year or 2. I'm not looking 5, 6, 7, or 10. That's too long. 1 or 2 years, at least 1 year or something outside your PhD.
Jacinta?
So I think this is very field dependent. So in chemical engineering, which is where my faculty home is, all of our applicants and candidates have postdoc experience, and several of them have company experience, and that's important for people who are interested in translational research. I'll note that that's not uniformly true. So, for example, I've sat on searches in civil engineering, and our departments have hired people without postdoc experience, but they've had a harder time in transitioning to research that is distinctive from their advisors, and I think that's why postdoc experience is almost essential at this point. You need to be able to distinguish yourself. You will not be able to compete directly with your advisor. They're better at writing those proposals than you are right now. So you do need a way of distinguishing yourself.
Michael?
Yes. So again, I'll echo the same comments. It's not unheard of, but certainly very rare that chemistry departments nowadays will hire people directly from their PhD. I'm aware of two people, and they're good friends of mine, who were absolute superstars during their PhD at Caltech, and received faculty job offers straight out of their PhDs. In fact, they interviewed for the jobs 6 days after they defended their PhD dissertation. However, they actually postponed the start of their faculty positions because they had postdocs already lined up. And they felt it was important too to go and do a postdoc for a year to build up some of those translational skills that you just don't really get as a PhD student. So they went and did postdocs for 1 year and then started their faculty positions. But I would say that is by far not the way most faculty jobs go.
Andrea, can I add one more thing on that? Mm-hmm. In Chemie, we also see not only are people asked for postdocs, but we also look for whether they've published as a postdoc. And that's where 1 year is a very short timeline. And explicitly, what we often look for is that you can be productive in more than one setting. And that's because people can come in with fantastic resumes from supergroups, but you need to know that they can be productive when they go to a different environment, especially if they're coming to a less resourced environment in which they did their PhD.
Perfect. So there are a couple of questions kind of all getting around the same idea. So what are some of the key factors that hiring committees look for in a candidate when choosing people to interview? So fit seems to be the most important, but that concept is pretty subjective. So I was curious what that word means to all the panelists. So what fit exactly is trying to get at. So we'll start with Jacinta.
So fit for us typically means, can you collaborate with faculty on campus, or can you take advantage of our local setting? So again, Houston is a large city. We have the largest medical complex in the world, and we're the home of the U.S. petrochemical industry. So we tend to prioritize and go after candidates who can interface with at least one of those two areas. So that's a very practical discussion of fit. I think that's really our big driver from the research standpoint. And then, can you express yourself orally? But that's later in the interview.
Michael?
Yeah. So in terms of fit, this is one of these kind of difficult ones where, as I either Andrea or Jacinta said earlier, I'm sorry, I forget which one, had said that you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe we just lost an analytical chemist, so we're really looking to replace someone in analytical chemistry. But of course, we'd look at everyone, especially if they're really good application. So fit is a hard one. You really want to do a couple of things. You want to go over the faculty ad with a fine-tooth comb and see if you can really pull any details out of that might give you a clue as to what people might be looking for. You can also find a lot of information just by Googling around and looking at the department. So, for example, we just built a new research building, and almost all of the synthetic chemists in our department are moving to brand new facilities in this building. And we're hiring this. I'll shamelessly plug that we're also hiring 2 positions in this cycle too. And they're going to expect it to take advantage of that new space, right? The VPR just gave us all this money, and the university just plowed all this money. So we want to take advantage of that. So these are the kind of things you can look at. So fit is a really hard thing to really unpack, But I think if you look around the department's website, if you look around, read that job ad, you can maybe tease some details out. If you're lucky and you have a connection to the department, like say, for example, you're currently working for my old postdoc advisor, I don't think there's anything wrong with reaching out and asking the question directly. Is there something in particular you're looking for? If nothing else, it saves everyone's time, right? You don't have to put together a non-competitive application. I don't have to review a non-competitive application. So I think if you feel comfortable with that and you have that connection, take advantage of it. Reach out and ask someone exactly what that fit looks like.
Andrea?
Well, I think I will agree quite well with what both of the panelists said. And fit, I will say, changes year to year. And so it could be, again, because of facilities, it could be because of the area, and that changes if somebody didn't get tenure or somebody retired that you didn't know. So it really, I think what I want to say is that people really internalize it. Like, I thought I was such a great fit for this and I didn't get it, and I must have done a bad job. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with that. It just, like, every little department is like a microcosmos, and it has, and it changes every year depending on who comes in, as an equation, what comes in, what comes out, and it's not that predictable actually. And so, obviously, yes, looking at what the initial search was like, and I think asking if someone knows, if you know someone, what are you looking for? And they may say, we would really like an experimentalist, but that doesn't mean they won't look at a computational person. Or, well, for this position, we're really looking, especially if they're looking for a junior faculty, then that's going to be a lot harder if you're not a junior faculty. Or if it's open all ranks, how open is the open? Is it really all ranks, or they have more, or looking for mid-career or senior person? And I think that's important to know, to also level up those expectations. But I think the fit changes quite a bit depending on the conditions on the ground at each particular department.
Okay, so I have a related question to this. So is it encouraged to apply for the faculty position more than once if you don't get an offer the first time? Do hiring committees remember you or think negatively if your first round wasn't spectacular? In other words, if no interview was obtained? And I'm going to kind of add to this. Is it also bad to apply to multiple departments at the same institution? In other words, do faculty committees in different departments at the same institution talk to each other? And would they think less of your application? So why don't we start with Jacinta? Yeah,
That's fine. So I've already forgot. The first question is, so we've actually interviewed people and made offers to people who applied 1 year when they were perhaps not as seasoned. So we've done this. So I would encourage people generally to do this. But that might be very locally specific, but I'm just saying few data points have done it. When I was applying for jobs, I applied to multiple departments and even had multiple department interviews, which was awkward. So that's hard. I did it. It wasn't successful. So I'll throw both of those statements out there. We don't talk as much as we should where I am, but I know other departments do. I generally encourage people to apply to all openings where they think they can be successful, and they even beyond the ad parameters, because of this issue that you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So I would say go for it.
Michael?
Absolutely. My attitude here is, if you think you're a good fit for something, please go ahead and apply. As you might be getting from a lot of the panelists' comments at this point, some of this is just down to luck. Are you the right person at the right time for that position? Other times you think you're perfect and you're actually a square peg for a round hole. So you're not going to know until you apply. So my philosophy on this is, if you see yourself working out there, go ahead and apply.
Andrea?
Well, I think the positions can change year to year. So I don't think any committee, there was actually someone that I saw who later went to Stanford, but that year the position was for simulations, and this person was an experimentalist. but then the following year, the position was for an experimentalist, so that would have been a perfect fit. So it just, again, it depends on year to year. Across departments, it depends on the school. I think here it will be, people will say, well, they're just trying, that they're not really material scientists, or they're not really chemies, then this other thing, and they're trying to just apply whatever they want. So my feeling is that here, that may not go so well, but again, it's very dependent on the school. I just think here people would be like saying, you don't know which department you want to be in. And so people do have kind of like possession of their departments. And so they're like, well, what you mean? This department is good for you, but this department is good for you. I will try to find the best fit out of those. But again, it very much depends on how the school operates. And I'm sure it's fine in other places. I just saying here in particular, especially with all the chairs that meet and talk to each other, that may not work so well. Or maybe it would work great and say, can this be a joint person? I don't know.
Yeah.
Andrea,
So
I'd just like to. Sorry,
I was going to say, I actually just to, as a counterpoint at USC, I actually did apply to EE physics and material science and chemie. But because the chemie department interviewed me first, then the EE department said they would interview me if the chemie department decided not to make a hire, and the physics department got the third tier. So they do all talk to each other, yes, but it won't necessarily hurt you. But I will echo, they do talk to each other. So it depends. So, but it can't hurt. Sorry, Michael, I interrupted.
Oh, no, not at all. Thank you. That in many ways, I was just going to say it depends. Andrea is 100% correct here. It depends on the culture and what that relationship is. So again, a friend of mine who is in the chemistry department at Illinois, they originally applied for a faculty position in chemistry, not to Chem E. And what happened was they said, it doesn't look like you're such a great fit here because of some of the research you want to pursue, but we think you'd be a great fit for Chem E. Do you mind if we share your application with them? So they were actually the ones who initiated the transfer to the other department. So that's part of the reason why I think, it's sometimes better to apply for things, even if you're not sure, because things like that happen all the time.
Yeah. So probably our top ranked question is what part of your CV makes the most difference? A paper, a grant fellowship, where you did your PhD or postdoc. So what part of the CV is the most important? Obviously, there's the research statement, diversity statement, teaching statement, all that. But what part of the CV is the most important? So why don't we start with Michael?
You're going to hate me for saying this, all of it. Obviously different people on your search committee will weigh different factors most importantly, and this gets into something that's it's a little bit of a touchy subject, but I think it's important to be completely honest. Things like your prior institutions, they certainly do have some weight on your CV, and the reason for that is especially if you're at a school like Texas Tech, we are again, research aspirational, just the same way as U of H is. Let's say we're in-state rivals, so we can't be too nice to each other. So
yeah, we can.
Yeah, okay, we can. All right. So I would say that we don't have the ability to use an expression, take a bath on a terrible hire. They happen from time to time. But we need to look for some guidance as to make an offer that we think is the best bet that we can possibly make. And the truth of the matter is things like pedigree do help. So I'd love to say it's a completely egalitarian process where truly it's a meritocracy, but that does help. So I would say that I just want people to be aware of that every part of your CV does count. Now, that being said, for me, publications are the most important thing because that shows a level of productivity that we hope you'll carry over into your independent research. And then, of course, in terms of fellowships, money talks. So, for example, if you have one of these NIH K99s that will turn over into an ROO, if you're walking in the door with 300K of your own money to spend on research, that's going to get you an interview at almost any institution in this country. So it's just one of those things where the answer is yes, all of your CV matters.
Jacinta, sorry.
Yeah, no. So I think that it really depends on who's reading it. It depends a little bit on your research subdiscipline as well. So I'll note that many of the people that we've interviewed for the biomolecular half of my department have indeed had K99/R000. And I think really, and the focus on having funding as a postdoc has increased over the 10 years that I've been a faculty member, especially in areas that touch biology. That said, I also think knowing I'm sitting, for example, on my college's P&T committee, and so publications rule from the standpoint of external letter writers and for understanding what you do when you go up for tenure here. So I think that from my standpoint, I look at what people have published, where they've published, what kinds of work they're doing. But that's very, very personal. So I'm not willing to say that one thing is overwhelms.
Andrea?
So I will also say that all the committees that I've been in, it's either for mechanical engineering position or material science positions. So I want to put that with that specific fields in mind. So generally in there, you don't come in with a postdoc grant. That would be a little odd. There's no NIH grants or anything like that. But you may have a fellow. You may be, a Lawrence fellow or whatever fellow. And so that always looks good. Obviously, you are looking at, past productivity, kind of telling you something about future productivity. And so we are looking, yes, obviously publications matter. Some people will be more hung up on where those publications were versus how many, or maybe both. I think it's important to be, the main author or the first author. Again, that also changes from field to field. But if you're, you have 20 publications and you are one of 20 authors in each of them, that's not as impressive as somebody having 10 were their first author, or 8 were their first author. So I think combinations of all those, and so that will be harder to tell if you kind of in the field of a middle of 20 other people and all your papers look the same, and maybe you're number 14 or 16, but that's kind of, so that doesn't help us much. So I think looking a little bit about what other similar, so if you go into an elite research institution like USC, the recent hires, I think it would be nice for you. It will be good to look at the recent hires because you kind of see what kind of caliber they're looking at. Because remember, it's not just the department. The next step is the dean. So these are people that the dean already say yes to. So I think, when I was hired, and then Andrea Marni was hired, and Michelle Povoleni was hired, you can kind of see kind of what the expectations were for the people coming into USC that being hired at that moment. So I think looking at recent hires in the same school, at least here in engineering, it will tell you a lot about what kind of stuff is needed to make it past the bar.
So I'm going to move on to, So I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic, which is interviewing. So how do you anticipate COVID-19 affecting on-campus interviews, particularly in terms of how chalk talks will be handled, in particular for candidates without high-end equipment like tablets or cameras built into their laptops? So Andrea.
Well, I will say that if you don't have that and you're applying, then figure out, that's number one. That I think for me, if you're not ready and you weren't able to get a camera nowadays, whether it was in your lab or somebody else or a friend, like it kind of already makes me wonder, are you ready? And so, we doing, during COVID, we actually did some interviews back in April and March here at USC. it was online. I think it's a little harder because you don't get to connect with the person, but it was very, it was, again, 2 full days of meeting with people. I think it gets a little bit more tiring. But I thought everybody did quite well with that one-on-ones as well. You had to keep really engaged, or whether that's coffee or Diet Coke, make sure you engage the whole time, because those are really long days, especially when you're in Zoom nonstop. And then the presentations really had to be even one notch higher, because you're missing some of that interaction that you will have otherwise if you were present. So put that extra time on the slides. They have to be really, really sharp at that point, because it's hard for people to keep people concentrated for the whole 45 minutes or 1 hour of your talk, especially if your slides are so, or you're not quite prepared. It really, up it up one more notch if it's all online.
Michael?
Yeah, so we actually hired 2 people last year, and because of the way the search ran, and of course with COVID, we ended up interviewing them remotely in March, and we offered both of them the job. So, and they both started this semester. So we now have a relatively good experience, in all of our departmental seminars this year, this semester, are also running in a virtual format as well. So at this point, we've gotten pretty good at it. There's still some faculty members who kind of suck at Zoom, but for the most part, we've gotten pretty good at running this. So I think the expectation is, quite rightly from what Andrea said, I think the expectation is, at this point in our lives with our current new normal, everyone would be anticipated to be pretty familiar with Zoom. And I'm not sure that people would really make accommodations for people lacking any of those kind of pieces of equipment or technology that you said, just because these things are readily available, and certainly you can borrow them from your lab mates or your PI, who's probably using them right now to teach their classes anyway. So I think that would be something that we'd expect you to handle sort of on your own.
Jacinta?
Yeah, you need to borrow. I think that if I hope sincerely that your boss, whoever it is, would be willing to lend if you can't find anything else. So we're different. We've had a hiring freeze because we've just started a med school. So here's my plug. We're hiring this year. The ad is about to go live. I am chairing the search committee. So one of the discussions I haven't heard yet. I've been talking a lot with our I don't know how to say this. The people in the provost's office who are in charge of selling us to you. And so one thing that we've talked a lot about is, how do you do a virtual tour? How do you sell campus? How do you show that Houston's an awesome place to live? So
that's the next question. So awesome.
Okay. And so actually, so I was talking to our internal, to really the wonderful person in our advanced center who is in charge of this, Dr. Erica Henderson. And she said that, this is something that they're working on. And again, UH is starting a med school. So we've actually had a hiring pause outside of that for a while. So we don't have any experience. That being said, you must have Zoom. And yes, Zoom sucks, right? Those two statements are both true. But please borrow, please ask around, get your friends. I don't think there's a way of doing this distance without having that contact.
So kind of building off of that, what are search committees doing to replace the social aspects of in-person interviewing? So the meals, just the mannerism. So all of that, the connection. So in the last panel, we talked about how important it was to make those in-person connections during the interview, because you could really get a sense of what the department culture was like. And that's just as important as figuring out what the, environment around the university is. So, Jacinta, you mentioned that, you're trying to work that out with the provost office, but do they have any ideas yet about how to solve this culture idea?
So I'll give 2 answers, and one will be, so they're working heavily on the university level. So I generally say this, and I'll say it again. I think Houston's an awesome place to live. It's, and I could talk about all the reasons why, but that's boring. So that level, I think, will be handled by the provost. What we are going to talk about as a department, and again, our search is behind because of issues related to funding and COVID and blah, 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 blah. So my department is currently working out how we're going to handle the other aspects of that. And we haven't hired, so we did not get this crash course in the spring. I'm going to, and as the person leading this mess, I am going to be the one thinking about how to do that. So I'm actually just going to defer to everyone else and listen to hear what you did and whether it worked.
Andrea?
So like I said, we had a couple of searches that were going. And so one of the things that, because I was a chair, one of the searches, I've made sure that we actually send them lunch and we had lunch together. And instead of the dinner, because we didn't have a dinner, they got a basket with fruits and candies because I'm a big fan of sweets. And I think that went really well for the candidates. They really appreciated it, especially since that was right at the beginning of COVID and everything was kind of crazy. But we did send them lunch and we send them a gift basket for dinner instead of the dinner. So that was one of the things that we did. Also making sure they had some breaks during the day, during the interview times, because of Zoom gets so tiring. And I would say if anybody is doing this online, make sure you know all the rules. It's surprising that you get to that level of interview and you forgot to ask some basic questions like, oh, I didn't know the talk was only 45 minutes. Oh, I didn't know there were not 2 talks. So those are like some very basic questions, especially now, that you should need to be asking right away so you are prepared. It's always amazing that it's always one person that doesn't seem to know what was going on or didn't see that there was 1 talk, not 2 talks. And then they're like, oh, but I went to this school and they had maybe 2 talks and you only have 1. And so, you know, my talk is an hour and a half and like, sorry, buddy, you got 45 minutes. And so I think all those things together, you know, you being proactive and finding out how their specific department is handling doing these virtual interviews. I mean, for LA, everybody that we interview, everybody have been to LA. So it was a little easier. And like, oh, I've been to LA and can you tell me some areas and this and that? And then we tried to connect with them, even though it was virtually through, you know, universal language of food.
Michael?
So, somewhat pathetically, we didn't do any of those things for faculty searches in the spring because we were still kind of learning the ropes how to do this. But I think that we are planning to incorporate many of those same things. Probably not the gift basket, although now that you mention it, I think that's probably a brilliant idea.
It's mine.
Even better idea. So it turns out that I think that these all-day Zoom sessions are just incredibly tiring, and especially for your eyes, staring at a screen all day long. So we thought it was important to build in breaks. We built in some breaks because there are sort of unofficial little breaks you take on these job interviews. You'll nip off to the restroom. You'll take any chance you can to sort of just take a little a mental break for just a couple of minutes. And if you're in Zoom calls all day, then you don't have that. So we built in some 30-minute breaks so people could at least, you know, get up, walk around, relax, even just a little bit. But we didn't do any of the lunch or the gift basket. So I'm seamlessly stealing those ideas and writing them down for us to do this go round.
Okay. I mean, there is a reason why Andrea is now the department chair. So she has lots of great ideas. Okay, so I just
Andrea, can I mention something as well?
Yeah.
Not necessarily with the people that we interview, but also the way that you took that interview seriously. We have some people very, very casually taking it, and yet we have some people in a suit. And so it felt like an interview. And I know that we are on Zoom, and I know that, you know, or like we actually had somebody in a really messy room, and I couldn't concentrate because I could see all the mess around. And so also think of that a little bit, because it wouldn't be necessarily where interviews take place, but, you know, maybe there's too much info for an interview to see your messy room and your underwear hanging from the back. So it may be obvious, but obviously it wasn't that obvious to everybody.
So one last question before I give everyone a chance to make a kind of a final piece of advice. Does service work, chairing for conferences, organizations, or mentoring in conferences help in this application process? So help kind of maybe round out a CV, or help with getting an interview? Or what is your thought with how service actually would contribute to getting a faculty position? And we'll start with Michael.
So I've been listening along all morning and into the afternoon, and it's been interesting to hear different perspectives from different fields. I know it's emerged sort of to me that chemical engineering have these conferences where you can sort of do almost interviews for faculty positions. That simply doesn't happen in chemistry. So it's been interesting to learn that in other fields this kind of thing happens. So I would say that service work is very interesting. I think it's incredibly valuable to do. I don't know that it would help you interview, if I was being completely honest. But where it will pay dividends is in future years when you're writing papers, when you're submitting papers, when you're submitting grants. All that mentorship, all that outreach and networking, that's really what it's doing, is you're really laying in, you're making those important connections, because those people that you're working with now will be the people reviewing your grant proposals, reviewing your manuscripts in the next few years. So I don't think it's helpful, at least in my perspective in chemistry, it's not helpful in getting the interview, but it will help you further down the line. So I would actually still advocate strongly that you take on those service responsibilities, but more with an eye towards the future as to how it's going to benefit you in a few years down the line.
Jacinta, sorry, my dogs are barking in the background, so I keep muting myself.
So I have two answers. One is, okay, I wrote our job ad, and I'm explicitly putting mentoring in, and mentoring as one of the criteria. So it's going to go on the rubric that I'm going to use to evaluate candidates. And that's a little bit unusual for us, but it's something that we need and value. So I'm actually going to say that's, and like I said, that's unusual, but I've done that intentionally. And because of the way that we're going to evaluate candidates, that will actually be a factor, because we need faculty members who are able to work with undergraduates, with graduate students. And if they have that experience, I want it actually recognized. It will be one part. So that's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. From the standpoint of conferences, I echo what Michael said. That's not something that I would value at the interview stage, because some of that depends on who you've worked for and how you've built a network. It will be very valuable going forward. It's something that you need to show for visibility in the field when you go up for tenure. And so it's good to get in line. And Chemi has a very formal process for doing that, which is unusual from my home discipline, which is physics. But I've actually chosen to value mentoring for this, for specific reasons. But I don't think that's generically true.
Andrea?
Well, I think we're also looking for a well-rounded candidate, so that would be a plus. I don't think that's a make or break, right? So if you've done lots of mentoring and lots of service, but you have 2 papers, it's still not going to make the cut. So, versus if you have 20 papers and you've only done a little bit of service, that will probably make the cut. But I also don't want to see somebody that has done nothing else. I think you're looking for someone that can walk and chew gum and maybe even run at the same time, or jump rope as they do all day. So that's one of the skills. And again, it doesn't have to be it shouldn't be a bunch of time or this long commitment for years and years, but it does show some branching out, which you have to do. And as a faculty member, you're going to have to wear many hats. And so it's a plus. But not necessarily a detriment, but I think it will help to look for a good, well-rounded person that is going to be able to juggle the 400,000 things you have to do as a faculty member, both the service and the mentoring. So that would be definitely somebody's CV looks exactly the same, but you have mentoring and some service that's going to put you up from that person. But not necessarily where the biggest strength of the CV comes in. It's just, like I said, it's a plus, and it makes you stand out because it's usually not there very much.
Great. So we're going to have one last question, which I want everyone to answer in the process of giving their closing thoughts, because I have a feeling I know the answer and it's going to be super short. So how often do members of a search committee have a shared rubric for candidates? Like a shared system for ranking, as well as a shared like ranking criteria, and then give like one last piece of advice for our audience. And we're going to start with Andrea.
So in our, we usually do have some kind of shared criteria that we all look for and that we agree beforehand what to do. So that to me has been on every committee. There's a shared criteria to begin with. Last piece of advice, I would say, just like I'm an experimentalist, so just like an experimentalist, try and try again. There's a lot of factors and things outside. The boundary conditions change every year in a department and in a school. So part is up to you, part of it is not up to you. And so, be prepared and do your best, but really don't take it personal or even that specific school, because it just depends on a lot of internal conditions that you don't control, but still go do your best because maybe you work there later.
Jacinta?
So this is standard best practice at my institution, but it has not been adopted by engineering, and I am going to do it this year. That's the diplomatic way of saying that. And I'm in the process of writing this right now based off of the job ad that I also wrote. So just as a note. I think one thing I wanted to say based on what I've heard a little bit from some of the other panelists, I think recognize that it's not about you, but that whether or not you get an offer from a specific school, but also recognize that you have the ability to bloom where you're planted. And you may not have the tons of offers that the previous panelists had. I did not. I also was applying during a dumpster fire of a year, which was 2008. So when job applications or job postings were evaporating faster than water droplets in Houston summer, okay? But you have the ability to go in with a perspective. So recognize that you're applying for a position at an institution. It may not be one that you considered, but take it seriously. It is an opportunity, and it may be the one that you got. So I think really taking the time to being open-minded and recognize that there's a lot of ways of being successful. So consider that as you put together applications.
Michael?
Okay, so I'll start by answering the first part again, which is simply, yes, we actually have to do it here. It's a formal requirement that we have a standard rubric that everyone adheres to when we score. And then we get together, we compare our scores, and the people who get the top scores are the ones that we invite for interviews. So actually it's a formal process that we have to adhere to in all faculty searches. I even have to do it when I'm hiring a postdoc. I have to come up with a hiring rubric, a hiring matrix, and then work off of that. Okay, so sort of closing thoughts. Basically, I'm just going to riff off of what both Andrea and Jacinta said. Yeah, apply broadly. And the reason for that is, which Jacinta said very poetically about blooming where you're planted. One thing I'll say is the way that the days of applying for a job, getting a job, and staying in that institution for the rest of your life are basically gone. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't want to stay at the same institution for the rest of your life, but nowadays people have multiple careers. Just because it's your first job doesn't mean it's your last job. So you go there, you be as successful as you possibly can. And if you are that successful, then other jobs will be offered to you. You will be headhunted to go to other universities. You can apply for other jobs. So I would say apply broadly. Don't think, well, I only want to go to the top 5 programs in my field. That's the only place I'm going to apply to. Apply to as many jobs as you have a legitimate fit or a legitimate shot at. And then you'll see where the chips land. And it may well be that you take a job at a lower ranked institution and then you work your tail off and you're incredibly successful. And then you move to that top 5 program later on. So I would say don't discount the possibility of starting at a lower ranked institution if you think you can make it work.
Awesome. So with that fabulous piece of advice, I want to thank our panelists for being here today, as well as thank all of the panelists who've given their morning and afternoon, depending on time zone, to this event. And I would remind everybody that we're going to continue tomorrow, and you can start entering questions into tomorrow's Slido link. So thank you again, and I will see everyone tomorrow morning.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good one.